Hello recap lovers, welcome to Mystic Recaps. In today's video, we'll watch a 2000 film, Castaway. So, grab your popcorns and keep an eye out for spoilers. A FedEx parcel is delivered to a guy at the beginning of the film. The recipient claims that the box is from his wife and has an angel wing sticker on it, while he is already moving with another lady. Chuck, our primary character, is a senior systems analyst at FedEx. Chuck is really serious about his work. He travels the globe and is presently in Russia to increase the efficiency of the hub. To achieve this, he sent a box from Memphis, Tennessee, to Nikola, Russia. A child from that family goes towards the FedEx hub carrying that item and delivers it to him, who then takes the clock out of the container. At absolute, it began. The time was 87 hours, 22 minutes, and 17 seconds when it arrived at its destination. And by Chuck's standards, it is unacceptable for a shipment to take 87 hours to reach its owners. As we must now realize, Chuck Noland is a guy who adheres to rigid deadlines and timetables. Getting the products delivered to their owners matters a lot to him. But despite all the turmoil in his personal life, he has been able to keep his long-term relationship with Kelly going strong. Chuck makes a call to Kelly from Russia to inform her that he will return to Memphis in around 18 hours. Chuck then travels to the US where he meets Kelly. They are a very devoted pair. After that, they go to the Christmas dinner with the Grand Noland family, when Chuck's brother brings up the possibility of the two of them getting married. However, they both laughed it off. Chuck becomes aware that he has to see the dentist since he is experiencing a toothache when eating. Then, as Kelly is gazing at him, he checks his pager. Kelly is aware of what is happening as they both exchange glances. Chuck had to depart for work once again, despite the holidays. Chuck intends to travel because of how dedicated he is to his job. Kelly attempts to reach a compromise by urging him to return home before New Year's Eve, to which he agrees. Kelly offers Chuck a vintage timepiece, a Christmas gift, a treasured family heritage. Chuck is moved by it. Before he leaves, he gives Kelly a little box, which she misinterprets as a ring. Then, as he heads to his flight on New Year's Eve, Chuck promises her that they'll celebrate by opening it together. Chuck joins the crew on a trip to Malaysia. After a few hours of travel, they run into a thunderstorm. After hearing the pilots discuss losing all radio reception, Chuck witnesses an internal explosion that causes the aircraft to experience severe turbulence, lose control, and one of the pilots to suffer a serious head injury while attempting to help Chuck to his seat. Chuck notices the Pacific Ocean approaching, and the jet crashes into it. Chuck begins to drown as the water inside the aircraft fills up. He makes use of the emergency airborne life raft. He had received it from one of the pilots. Eventually, Chuck is able to get himself floating with the aid of the raft, but the weather is not favorable, and massive ocean waves begin to strike him. For Chuck, it's a matter of life or death. Fortunately, Chuck makes it through and finds himself on an isolated island. After exiting the raft, Chuck notices that the watch is still with him. Additionally, he unearths a couple FedEx parcels that had washed up on the coast. He discovers and takes up the parcels, while no other island could be seen for miles. To capture the notice of any incoming aircraft, he scrawls a help sign on the ground. His first day on the island concludes as he stares at the clock Kelly gave him. Next morning, he discovers a few more parcels. On the island, he also finds coconuts, which he uses to satisfy his thirst. He continues to investigate the island and discovers a cave. To obtain a better perspective of everything, he then climbs the island. He rapidly descends to the ocean after seeing something in the water. To his amazement, though, it's the dead corpse of the pilot that attempted to rescue him. Chuck prepares a grave and sets the pilot's lifeless corpse down. After providing a resting spot for the guy who attempted to help him, his second day comes to a close. On the third night, he continues to focus on the image of Kelly that is housed within the watch she gave him. He notices a ship off the island. He cries out for assistance, but the ship cannot hear him because of distance. He flashes at them with the little torchlight, but it also doesn't do anything to save his life. Chuck loads up the makeshift raft with his belongings in the hopes of making it to the ship, but the tides are much too powerful, and he is pushed overboard. He yells out in agony after cutting his leg on a coral reef and gives up. Chuck returns to the island as it begins to pour hard and seeks refuge. He enters a cave he found a few days earlier to escape the rain, and within the cave, Chuck discovers a little water stream and begins drinking water from it. Exhausted by the day's endeavors, Chuck falls asleep. He examines the parcels the next day in the hopes of discovering anything helpful. He discovers a volleyball in one of the parcels. He also discovers a set of skate boots and a clothing. Thanks to which he now finds it simple to chop coconuts, and he even uses the clothing to capture tiny fish. He opens everything with the exception of one item that has an angel wing sticker on it. Chuck decides not to open the last package to keep it as a source of inspiration for him to live. He ultimately settles and attempts to start a fire. He tries for hours on end without any luck and eventually breaks when he gets a cut on his hands. Frustrated, he yells at the top of his lungs while throwing anything in his path. He discovers his blood-stained handprint on the volleyball a short while later. To give the impression that someone else was around, Chuck creates a face on the volleyball and positions it in front of him. After a while, he begins speaking to the ball. He eventually succeeds in starting a fire. Chuck becomes joyful and begins to dance in front of the fire. Finally, he could look forward to something. He uses the fire to cook a crab, then devours it while conversing with the ball. Wilson was the name he gave to the ball, since it was made by Wilson's firm. He has terrible toothache the next day. To get his teeth, he utilizes a rock and his skate boot, but throughout the process loses consciousness. He's been stranded on this island for 4 years now. Chuck doesn't resemble the person he was 4 years ago. He has undergone significant transformation while on the island, including significant hair and beard growth. Wilson has grown to be significant in his life, which has in some ways sustained him. When he goes outside to investigate a disturbance he hears one day while resting in his cave, he discovers a shattered piece of a plastic door and carries it inside. Thinking about what to do with the shattered plastic door piece, Chuck examines it and later realizes a potential use for it. To determine what time it is, Chuck made a chart of the months. Wilson is informed by Chuck that they will depart from the area in April when the sea waves will be in their advantage. Chuck has 2 months to leave the island. Chuck begins to construct a wooden raft as a means of escape. He also uses tree skins to build ropes. Then ties the wood together with those ropes. When he runs out of rope, he ties the woods together using cassette reels, but he still needs more rope. To acquire extra rope for the raft, he climbs to the island's summit. Here, we see that Chuck had virtually given up on life and was thinking about suicide in the preceding 4 years. But because he didn't, he now utilizes that rope and arranges the plastic sheet in his raft in a manner that will increase the likelihood that it will sail. The moment has come. Chuck inscribes a message on a rock before he and Wilson board their ship. He begins rowing the raft in an effort to protect it from the powerful waves. He battles the waves and succeeds in maintaining the raft's buoyancy. Chuck believes that he has solved every issue. He is content. And he stays on that raft for additional days in the hopes that it would take him back to his house. But he is unaware that he would soon face further issues. He isn't drinking any water, and he isn't eating anything. He then begins to catch fish to eat and drinks the rainwater that has accumulated in his raft. Chuck clings to the raft for his life when it begins to rain fiercely one night. The raft is in terrible shape after the storm has passed. Wilson can't be found by Chuck, the ball, who has been his sole companion for more than 4 years. When Wilson is eventually seen drifting a short distance from the raft, Chuck begins to worry. To rescue Wilson, he dives into the ocean. In an effort to maintain control of the raft, he reaches out with one hand to touch Wilson while holding onto the raft with the other. His hand keeps losing the rope leading to the raft. Chuck had to halt in order to recover it. Meanwhile, Wilson has grown further distant from Chuck. Despite his best efforts, he is unable to connect with Wilson. Chuck eventually loses faith in bringing him back and sobs in agony at having lost him. Wilson, who was his only companion during his 4 years on the island, is gone, and the raft is damaged. Chuck's situation seems to be hopeless. Chuck becomes ill and is unable to move. Water is sprayed by a whale. When Chuck opens his eyes at last, he turns around to see a big cargo ship going by. After all the difficulties and calamities he encountered, Chuck is ultimately rescued. Chuck is on a plane 4 weeks later to return to his house and see his family. He has a chance to meet someone after landing whom he doesn't appear to be familiar with. Then the individual identifies himself as Kelly's spouse. He attempts to explain that Kelly couldn't see him because she was too emotional and perplexed. Chuck remains motionless because he has no idea of what to say or do about the love of his life, whom he thought about so often while on that island for more than 4 years. His survival was celebrated in a party by his friends and family. Chuck examines a lobster after everyone has left, and it reminds him of the crabs he ate on that island. He also takes a glance at a lighter to remember how vital fire once was to him. Even in his bed, Chuck is unable to sleep. Even though Kelly had married someone else, she had given him the identical watch years before, and he is now lying on the ground gazing at it. He decides to take a cab to Kelly's home because he needs closure. Kelly lets him inside after opening the door. Chuck wants to express this. Kelly, though, embraces him right away. Kelly is surprised to find that Chuck still has the watch she gave him as a gift since it is a family relic. Chuck presents it to her. Kelly is to keep watch for Chuck. Then Kelly reveals to him that she had retained his car after he vanished. Chuck enters the vehicle after receiving the vehicle's keys from her. The two of them kiss, but Kelly breaks the kiss. Chuck starts his car to leave. But Kelly has more to say. Chuck hears her shout and she rushes over to him. Chuck exits his vehicle as well, and the two of them kiss. Kelly claims that she had to let him go after 4 years of searching for him, but she has always loved him and would always do so. Chuck claims to love her as well, but he is aware that it is too late for them to reconcile. Kelly also can't abandon her family. They decide that parting ways is for the best. We see him driving his car at the conclusion of the film. All the packages he opened on the island will be delivered by him. After stopping at a residence but being unable to locate anybody, he puts a present and note on the door. My life was saved by this parcel. Chuck Noland, thank you. Chuck pulls over to look at the map. He is pondering his next course of action. A lady pulls over and offers to assist. The lady responds to Chuck's query about where the road front of him leads. She then leaves. Chuck observes the identical angel wings that were on the box are now on the rear of her pickup. The package, which gave him the will to live, belonged to the lady he had just met, and it's possible that she's single. If you recall what her spouse was doing at the beginning of the film,